Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Ron, for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Mamoon Chowdry. I'm a solution architect at AWS. Quite honestly, one of the coolest parts of my job is I get to present to people like you. I get to talk with real-life customers in the field and share some of the experiences that we've seen across large enterprises, across a range of industries. So whether you're in financial services, healthcare, life sciences, or indeed government agencies, we see a lot of large enterprises and large organizations really struggling with managing security and compliance at scale. And so what I'd like to do is spend the next 30 minutes or so sharing with you what we commonly see across industries, what are some best practices, and how we encourage customers to think about security and compliance at scale. Before I go any further, can I make sure that everybody can hear me okay? Ron, is the audio okay? And can you see my slides okay?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. So if you are like me and you've been around the block for a little bit, you may have invariably been asked this question in some way, shape, or form. Invariably, every CIO, CTO, CISO, and indeed a few CEOs asked at some point somebody within their organization, hey, are we secure? Are we compliant? And we typically see this happening the morning after there's a story in the New York Times and a Wall Street Journal about somebody else having a customer data breach. I don't know about you, but I have a lifetime of free credit reporting from all of the folks that I've used in the past who've had various credit breaches. And so this is a common question that people that we work with tell us about. Invariably, in some form, they're asked, hey, are we secure? Is our customer data protected? Are we compliant? And that can be a really, really hard question to answer. Enterprise architectures in large, complex IT organizations can be very complex. So if your CIO asks you, hey, where is that customer data being stored? Is any of it being stored in these servers over here? Are we sure that all of that data is encrypted in transit? Do we know who's accessing that data? Do we know who had access to that data last Tuesday, for example? And so these are invariably really, really hard questions to answer, and they have been really hard to answer for a long time. Now, if you have a fairly small scale IT infrastructure, you may have maybe a few desktop PCs, you may have a single chassis in the corner of a colo in a cage somewhere, then invariably you could probably figure out the answers to those questions. But what happens if you are an organization where you have hundreds of servers, or thousands, or indeed tens of thousands, as many of our customers do? Does your compliance regime scale up to that? Do your security controls scale up to that? Can you answer those very same questions when you're operating at the scale that many large enterprises very often do? And so what we commonly hear is from GRC teams at large enterprises is that it's really hard to operate compliance and security at scale. And so what you're going to be hearing in the rest of this presentation is how we encourage enterprises to successfully address those challenges at scale. And hopefully my slides should be advancing. If it is advancing correctly, you should be looking at an agenda. Please stop me if you are not. And so a few of the things that we'll discuss in this presentation, we'll discuss some of the common compliance and audit challenges that enterprises tell us they have. We'll identify some of the high-level themes and use cases that we see across governance, regulatory, and compliance teams at organizations. And then we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about how to secure your IT infrastructure at scale and how to ensure compliance at scale. Now, whilst these may sound very similar in nature, they're actually markedly different. And we'll talk about that as well. Regardless of industry, regardless of the kind of customers you have, regardless of the kind of scale that you operate at, we find that most large organizations and enterprises need to address not just security, but also compliance at scale. And that's really hard to do. And we're going to peel back the onion a little bit and talk about some of these challenges in a little bit more detail. All right, so when invariably somebody in an IT organization is asked, are we secure? Are we in compliance? The immediate challenges we often find that those people are faced with are that, one, they're dealing very often with a huge backlog of compliance requirements. IT infrastructures are always changing, always evolving, especially now with DevOps. Developers are trying to develop and build new applications much quicker. Very often somebody will say, hey, my organization is trying to deploy an application that deals with medical records, so now I need to support HIPAA compliance, and I've never dealt with that before. How do I figure that out? We also find that a lot of the evidence that the people have to collect to maintain an audit trail to prove that they're in compliance, to prove that they have the appropriate security controls that are in place, come in many, many different formats. So they very often have to be manually converted or manually inspected to be able to produce a single report to address those high-level questions. And we find very often that when people put checks in place, or they begin to support various compliance requirements for their organization, they get flooded with alerts, and there's oceans and oceans of alerts, and it's really, really hard to understand what are the trends, what are the red flags that need immediate attention, what are the alerts that are just duplicative or just consistent with a particular type of application or a particular aspect of your infrastructure or your global infrastructure, and so can be aggregated to a much higher level. And then also, because there are so many different tools and services, some of which you've heard in this seminar already, that produce findings that are important for somebody who's assessing your security posture or your compliance posture, having an integrated view across all of those tools is really, really difficult to do. And there's a number of reasons why we find ourselves in this stage. If you kind of step back a little bit, many CIOs and CTOs are kind of dealing with these challenges at a very high level, and this is what their GRC teams are telling them. One, that their IT landscape is very, very dynamic. It's always changing, and the pace of innovation, the pace of application deployments is only accelerating, and that happens exponentially so with the cloud. That leads to a dramatic increase in the volume, variety, and velocity of findings that have to be analyzed by GRC teams. And we find that a lot of that analysis is actually being done manually, which works fine if you have 10 applications or maybe 50 applications. But what happens if you have 1,000? What happens if you have 10,000 applications, which many organizations now do? That becomes a problem that doesn't scale very well. Also, a lot of organizations now are increasingly global, and that means they have infrastructure all over the world that's subject to different requirements. And then there are global regulatory regimes. You may have a finance application in Hong Kong where they have unique banking regulations over there that don't apply to Italy or Germany. So now you've got different compliance postures that you have to maintain in different parts of the world. And then when you add to that the mix of a cloud, because the cloud allows you to do very, very cool things at a phenomenal scale that people find very hard to match within their own data centers, all of these challenges become magnified. And in fact, we surveyed our own customers, and this is what they told us. 80% of people, before they used cloud automation, were still doing things in a manual way. That's a phenomenal amount of human capital of what we call undifferentiated heavy lifting. It's not particularly enjoyable. It's not particularly fun. It doesn't make your business any more successful than your competitors necessarily, directly, but still we spend a lot of time doing these kind of activities. They tell us They spend about 60% of that time just collecting data, never mind analyzing that data or reporting on that data, or indeed taking remediative actions that improve your compliance or security posture. Just 60% of the time is spent collecting that data. And what enterprises tell us is they want to bring automation at scale to be able to do the things that they've been trying to do, albeit with a lot of manual heavy lifting. Ideally, what they want to be able to do is define the controls and let the cloud run those controls and automate those controls without them having to be manually looking over them. So there are essentially three things that customers tell us they want. They want a great way to be able to manage risk through automation. They want a convenient way to be able to have continuous oversight of that risk. So that's continuous monitoring in an automated fashion. And finally, they want to have extensive and complete risk assurance. And think of it, if you're not familiar with the term risk assurance, what that essentially means is providing an audit trail. So when an auditor turns up at your data center and says, show me how you are protecting your customer data, show me how you are protecting your patient health records, show me how you are protecting your customers' banking records, you have a complete end-to-end audit trail which shows what are the controls that you put in place, what is the evidence that those controls are working, can you show me the end-to-end correlation of those controls and the effect that they have on your compliance posture, and provide that neat piece of evidence to me in a very simple report so that I can check this off and say, yes, you are actually compliant. It may sound easy, it may sound pretty matter of fact, but actually it's not easy to do at all in practice. So if you're not familiar with the cloud, or if you're new to the cloud, at AWS, we have what we call a shared responsibility model. This is how we accelerate our customers. We do that by bringing automation and innovation to offload some of that manual, undifferentiated heavy lifting and take it off our customers' shoulders. So when it comes to security, for example, we manage the barbed wire and the armed guards around the data centers. We manage who has physical access to the infrastructure. We secure the hypervisor. We manage the patching of the hypervisor. But if you fire up a Windows instance, for example, you're responsible for everything that happens within that Windows instance, how you configure it, whether you make it publicly available, are you hosting a website, or maybe you're storing confidential data, in which case it needs to be private. That configuration is up to you. But by taking over a significant part of those responsibilities, it means that customers can focus more on that which is unique to their business and that which is unique to their customers. And so in that very same vein, we also share responsibility for compliance with our customers. And let me show you what that looks like. And so at AWS, what we do is we provide support for many different compliance regimes and frameworks. You may say, look, I want to be ISO 27000 compliant. I want to be SOX compliant. I need to be HIPAA compliant or PCI compliant. And we'll give you the automation to support those frameworks. And what you do is at the top here in the white section of this slide, where you select the controls that you want to put in place, you tell the clouds to automate those controls and collect the evidence for you. It will report its findings for you and allow you to decide, what are you going to do with those findings? Are you going to mitigate those manually? Would you like the cloud to automatically remediate those? Would you simply like to build a report to maintain an audit trail? That's up to you. But what you see here is through that shared responsibility model, a lot of that undifferentiated heavy lifting falls away. You can focus, or your governance, regulatory, and compliance teams focus on identifying what are the controls they want to have active, what are the controls they want to support for the business counterparts, and let the clouds do that heavy lifting. So when your CIO comes to you or your CISO comes to you and says, hey, can you tell me where our customer data is being stored? How is it being protected? And who has access to this data? You should be very easily able to answer those questions, because in the cloud, the model that I would ask you to take away in your minds from this presentation is that you define your cloud posture, you define your compliance posture, and you let the cloud operate and automate it at scale. This is what enterprises and large government agencies do in AWS today. They take a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting out, offload that to AWS, where we bring automation so that you can focus on selecting the compliance posture that is important to you. Whatever that posture may be, we support a wide range of global compliance regimes all across the globe. This is not a complete list, but this is how our customers approach the very complex, very expensive problem of ensuring compliance across their global IT infrastructure. So what does that look like in practice with the cloud? Well, if you look at the 3 layers in terms of managing risk, overseeing risk, and providing risk assurance, we have numerous services at AWS to allow customers to kind of fulfill each one of these 3 layers. These 3 layers are actually referred to as the 3 lines model. They come from the Institute of Internal Auditors, the IIA, and it's really a model that allows you to build strong governance and risk management. The first category is how do you kind of build your risk controls and manage your day-to-day risk. The second category is how do you monitor and visualize that risk? How do you assess that risk? And the third is how do you build an audit trail so that you can provide an evidentiary document to an auditor or to your CISO saying, yes, we are secure, or yes, we are compliant. And so let me kind of deep dive a little bit into security. Whatever tooling you use, whatever platform you're on, whether you're in your own data centers or a cloud, doesn't have to be the AWS cloud, I will ask you to consider, are you in a place today where you can automatically find deviations from your defined security posture, where you can automatically collect findings, security findings from across your entire IT infrastructure? And can you automate the remediation of those findings very quickly? Rather than getting paged at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning, are you in a position where your automation, whatever that automation is, can automate those findings for you? Here's the AWS approach, and I'll ask you to kind of contrast and compare with what you might be doing today within your own environments. So we have a service called Security Hub. That service is a centralized collection point for all kinds of security findings from across your IT infrastructure. There may be Amazon services, networking services, auditing services, data inspection, data loss prevention services, identity and access management services. It collects findings from all of those and performs automated security checks where you define, hey, these are the checks that are really important to me. All of my customer data has to be encrypted. All of my customer data should only be accessible to these particular personas or these particular users, and so forth. Assess that posture, assess those findings, present them to me, and allow me to take action. That's what security does, the Security Hub does. On the left-hand side, you'll see that we take inputs, not just from Amazon services, but from a whole host of third-party tools, some of which you've heard here today. We aggregate those findings and allow you to kind of store them in a place where you can begin to do detection work. So this is really where your GRC team should be focused. They shouldn't be manually pouring through logs. They shouldn't be manually trying to collect logs and correlate them together. They should be looking at findings that have already been identified and assess, hey, is our security posture correct? Are we meeting that security posture? If not, do we need to reconfigure our posture, or do we need to take remediative action somewhere within our infrastructure? I can also pass those findings on to Amazon Audit Manager, which I'll talk to later on in this presentation, as well as third-party tools. Maybe I have an SIEM tool as well. And so Security Hub is really how people begin to kind of automate a lot of the security heavy lifting of managing their security infrastructure globally at scale across thousands and thousands of servers or thousands and thousands of applications. So you essentially define where do you want to collect your security data from? Is it from an Amazon service? Is it from a third-party application, or maybe a combination of the above? and it will generate insights for you, and you can add your own custom insights. There may be things that may be unique to your organization, and this is just a sample here, but it will tell you, hey, if you're looking for S3 buckets that are public, for example, here's what we found in the last 90 days, and it will take you directly to those resources so you can remediate them. It gives you a whole host of findings that you can double click on and take immediate remediative action. So that's your single pane of glass across your entire IT infrastructure, whether in a data center, whether in a cloud, whether in the United States, whether in Asia Pacific or elsewhere on the planet. It allows you to monitor those and automate those 3 layers of defense across your entire IT infrastructure. I'm not here, by the way, to sell you Security Hub. I'm here to ask you, can you answer these questions if your CIO or CISO was to ask them to you? And do you have these capabilities with your own IT infrastructure? Now, similarly, when it comes to compliance, you should have the same expectations. What we find is that, as I mentioned earlier, auditing of compliance posture is very manual. There's a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting. It can be very, very error prone. It involves very often a whole host of people, some of whom are often non-technical. There are business people, there are legal folks, governance, regulatory, compliance specialists, IT people, SecOps people. All of these people have to get into a room and figure out, hey, are we compliant or not? And that involves a lot of kind of manual log inspection, looking at configurations, and so forth. We have a service called Audit Manager, which we think automates a lot of things that we think enterprises should be thinking about. So, for example, can you take your compliance controls and actually map them to the configuration of your IT infrastructure? If you're using a whole host of different types of hardware and different types of third-party apps, there may be a million places where you have to look to identify if you're a satisfied control. Well, can you collect all of those things in one place? Can you automate those? Can you build reports on an automated basis as opposed to a manual basis? And can you share those findings across teams, across functional teams in your organization? And finally, can you maintain an audit trail that goes back to the beginning of time of your IT organization? Can you show to an auditor that, hey, I have been improving my compliance posture over the last 18 months, and here's the evidence to show that? Can you do that today? Many people will tell us no. Well, you should be able to do that today, no matter which industry you're in. As I mentioned right at the beginning, across industries, people are finding themselves on the front page of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal because they aren't able to easily answer that question. In a similar way, the Audit Manager works like this. It allows you to kind of review and select those compliance frameworks that are really important to you. Is it FedRAMP? Is it PCI DSS? Is it HIPAA compliance? Is it, the Hong Kong banking regulations that I managed earlier? Indeed, you may have your own in-house framework. You may have your own kind of compliance posture that you've customized and works really well for you or for your industry, that you can bring that into Audit Manager as well. Then you define the scope of that. Hey, I want to be PCI compliant across all my production applications in North America, for example. Okay, great. That's my defined scope for this compliance assessment. Once you've done that, Audit Manager will go and manage now the collection of data, the gathering of evidence, the collection of an audit trail, and the reporting of your compliance posture over time based on the scope and the frameworks that you define. And so here's an example of what it looks like. So these are actual screenshots again. So here I can select, various frameworks, and there are many, many frameworks that we support. This is just what came up on the first page here. Once you define the scope, it will actually go and collect the evidence for you. Here, what we're looking at is for a single control. This is around privileged users having access to a particular system. For a single control, can I collect evidence? Can I collect what is the actual details of the control? Can I store them together in a single folder and create a report as well? And that's what this screenshot is showing. Audit Manager can do this for you across hundreds of thousands of applications, across hundreds of thousands of different controls on a completely automatic basis. So rather than your GRC team spending 60% of their time just getting the data, they can now spend that 60% of their time actually analyzing the results and moving on to validating the compliance posture that you have within your organization. You can click on any one of these findings and it's very, very thorough. So these are the kind of details that you should be collecting to satisfy either an internal or an external auditor. Everything from the name of the control, where that control came from, when was the evidence collected, where was it collected from, how was it collected, were you in compliance, were you not in compliance, what are historical trends for that control, for that scope, and so forth. All of these things will be incredibly painful to generate manually, but it's done on an automated basis for you. As I mentioned, we support a wide variety of frameworks, and indeed you can bring your own as well. You can even audit your licensing deployment. A lot of third-party licensing agreements are very, very complex. And so even auditing your licensing across your IT infrastructure can be difficult as well. This will do that too. And so here's where I would ask you to consider. If your CIO or CISO comes to you and says, hey, are we secure? Can you give them a report that looks something like this? Can you give them something where they can double click on and see in near real time what their security posture is across their entire IT infrastructure? Can you show them historical trends where you're improving your security posture? If not, how can you get to that point? Similarly, when it comes to compliance, can you provide an evidentiary audit trail on an automatic basis without having to spend 60% of your time just collecting the data? If not, there are a wide variety of solutions out there that you can use to kind of automate that on your behalf. Some of which you've seen here, some of which you've seen earlier on within this seminar as well. I will close by sharing that we have a number of free resources to help you. You're by no means on your own. If you feel that the way you manage compliance today is not what it can be, it's not as efficient as maybe your competitors may be doing. Maybe your competitors are more optimal in the way they're deploying their resources to manage the same compliance posture. We have a free Cloud Audit Academy that is available online for you and your colleagues to be able to understand how can you audit and assess risk across your IT infrastructure at scale. We also have a large variety of security training resources as well. So whether you want to deep dive into how do you manage reporting your security posture, how you manage identity and access management or network security, how do you ensure all of my customer data is always encrypted in flight. We have a wide variety of free online training that is available for you as well. The important thing I would ask you to take away from here is if you are spending a phenomenal amount of time manually assessing your security, manually assessing your compliance, that is not ideal. Many enterprises now have a far more optimal way of doing that. And I would encourage you to use these free resources to learn how you can bring those same best practices to your own organization. I will close by saying thank you very much. I'm including my email address here because I would love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to talk about cloud, security, machine learning, or indeed if you just want to say hi, or if you have feedback on this presentation, love to hear it. It is the coolest part of my job to hear from customers like yourself. So with that being said, I think I'm about 30 seconds early, so happy to close and take any questions. Otherwise, I'll hand over to you, Ron.